أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي لا يبلغه مدحته القائلون ولا يحصي نعماءه العادون ولا يؤدي حقه المجتهدون الذي لا يدركه بعد الهمم ولا يناله غوص الفطن الذي ليس لصفته حد محدود ولا نعت موجود ولا وقت معدود ولا أجل ممدود. أما بعد، فقد قال الله الحكيم في محكم كتابه الكريم: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. إن الإنسان خلق هلوعا إذا مسه الشر جزوعا وإذا مسه الخير منوعا إلا المصلين الذين هم على صلاتهم دائمون والذين هم في أموالهم حق معلوم للسائل والمحروم والذين يصدقون بيوم الدين والذين هم من عذاب ربهم مشفقون إن عذاب ربهم غير مأمون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعجل فرجه. For the love of our beloved Prophet and his beloved progeny, a second loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. For the hastening in the return of our beloved 12th Imam, a third final loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Let us begin tonight, inshallah, first and foremost by congratulating all of you on the birth of one of the masters of the youth of heaven, our second beloved Imam, Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ajil farajah. The topic that we'll be discussing starting from tonight as we go through one of these 7 deadly vices is the vice known as greed. The Quran uses different terminology to refer to this particular vice. Sometimes in the Quran it's referred to as al-hirs. Other times the Quran uses words like tama' or hala', or even the word shuh, you will find, is used twice in the verses of the Quran. But regardless, in terms of the differences of these different terminology, this idea of hirs is that there is always a sense within me as a human being that nothing is going to fully fulfill me. I always want more. No matter what I have, there's always something out there bigger, better, shinier that I want to chase in my life. This is the concept of greed. And we want to take some time to discuss this topic on tonight in particular for 2 different reasons and from 2 different angles. The first of those is because greed lies at the very core and at the root of many of the other vices that we're going to discuss during these nights. When we talk about anger, when we talk about arrogance, when we talk about mira, when we talk about riya, a lot of these at their root actually comes back to the fact that I as a human being am looking for some extra pleasure from this world. I'm looking for something extra that I want, and that is why I'm willing to engage in these other vices to get my hands on that particular pleasure or thing. Therefore, greed is at the root of many of these vices that we will discuss. We also want to discuss it on an auspicious occasion like tonight, because the the characteristic of greed, this vice of greed, lies at the very core of the story of the second Imam. If you look at the life of the second Imam and you look at the trajectory of his khilafah, the trajectory of his imamah, you will find greed played a very big role, and it impacted negatively the position of the second Imam and how he had to deal with the obstacles that were coming his way. A lot of it came back to the issue of greed. Where was this greed? The greed came from one end on the side of his enemies, and then that greed also came from the other end, from those who claimed to be his companions. From both ends, greed impacted the situation of our beloved second Imam. The greed from the side of the enemies, of course, came from an individual who manifested greed maybe like no other of the companions of the Prophet, and that was Muawiyah. Muawiyah was a person who manifested greed in a very complete manner. So much so that he lived life in a very luxurious manner. Even the second Khalifa who came to visit him objected to him. He said, this life that you're living doesn't look like the life of a governor of a Muslim government. It almost feels like you're living in the Roman Empire, you're living in the Persian Empire. And of course, Muawiyah had his own response to that. He had his own justification to that, because justifying was one of the things that Muawiyah did very well. And then on the other hand, you found that Muawiyah's greed continued. And that is why when the second Imam was now agreed to become the next Khalifa, Muawiyah was not okay with that. He was not going to sit back and watch the master of the youth of heaven begin to rule and govern the whole Muslim ummah. He said, no, we have to put a pause to this right now. And so he prepared to go to war. The greed of Muawiyah played a critical role in shaping the history of the Muslim ummah as we know it today. But there was also greed from the side of the companions of the second Imam as well. Why? Because when the second Imam had put together his army and they were stationed outside of Sham, preparing to go up against the army of Muawiyah, one of their leaders, according to some narrations, was an individual by the name of Ubaydullah ibn Abbas. This is the brother of Abdullah ibn Abbas, the famous Ibn Abbas that we read of in history. Ubaydullah was the commander of the army of the second Imam. But what happened is one day the troops woke up and the Imam himself was in Madain, and these troops were stationed further away. The troops woke up one day to the reality that in fact our commander is not with us anymore. Imagine that feeling. You wake up in the morning, you're preparing for battle, and the guy who was telling you yesterday to prepare for this battle is nowhere to be found himself. This is a very odd situation. Why? Because Muawiyah gave him the promise that if you come to our side, 1 million silver dirhams I will give to you. And Ubaydullah ibn Abbas overnight was bought through the greed that he carried in his heart. This is why you find a beautiful narration from the second Imam. He mentions 3 different sins, and he says these 3 sins were the sins that defined the trajectory of mankind. And of those 3 sins, one of them is greed. What were those 3 sins? He said, number 1, al-kibra, arrogance, defined the trajectory of mankind. Why? Because it was the arrogance of Iblis that forced him to deal with Adam the way that he dealt with Adam. Number 1. Number 2, al-hasad, jealousy. This also defined the trajectory of mankind. Why? Because Qabil got jealous over Habil. And number 3, al-hirs, and greed. It was the greed and wanting more of Adam that pushed him in heaven, even though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had encouraged him not to touch from the fruit of the tree. It was his greed that pushed him to finally go and make that mistake and bring mankind to this earth that we live on today. Therefore, the topic of greed is a very deep topic, and we'll discuss this topic tonight, inshallah, by posing the following questions. Number 1, is this sense of us always wanting more and never being satisfied with what we have, is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? And is it part of our creation? Did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala place it in my heart for a particular reason? Number 2, how does this world that we live in today with social media exacerbate the sense of greed that I have? And how am I waking up every morning and more options are being presented to me through the screen of my phone. Number 3, what are the 2 reasons why Islam makes it very clear that going down the route of running after your greed and trying to fulfill your greed will not lead you to salvation or happiness in this world? Number 4, what are the recommendations I can keep in mind if I want to work hard to combat the greed that I have in my heart? Number 5, what is the root of greed and where does it in fact stem from? Number 6, what is the significance of the asceticism and the lack of greed that you find in our religious leadership, what we refer to as maraji'? And how do we see this play out very differently when it comes to the leadership of other faiths, sometimes in Christianity, in Catholicism with the Pope, and even sometimes when you compare the marja' of a 12 Imam Shia school of thought with the leader of, for example, the Nizari Ismaili school of thought, the Agha Khans, how do we see their lives are different from one another? And number 7, and finally, how do we see in the seerah of the second Imam the generosity that he had, the way he was able to manage this sense of always wanting more, and how many times did he divide all of his wealth between himself and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for charity? Tonight, inshallah, we'll delve into these 7 questions with a loud salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Let's begin from here. We have to understand something very important. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it very clear. This idea and sense that I have inside of myself, that I always want more, nothing fully satisfies me. Whatever else there is out in the world, I also want that, is in fact how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created me. So the verses in Surah Al-Ma'arij, they say what? إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ خُلِقَ هَلُوعًا. The human being has been created with greed. This is odd. We assume greed is something that comes onto me after I am created with a divine character. No, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put greed within you and I, and He's put it there for a reason which we will discuss. He said, إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ خُلِقَ هَلُوعًا. Because he has this greed, 2 characteristics begin to show themselves. إِذَا مَسَّهُ الشَّرُّ جَزُوعًا. If he begins going through a hard time, you know what happens? He's very impatient. He can't take it. He doesn't want to be dealing with this. He wants all the extra stuff that's there in life. Now you're even taking this away from him. He's very unhappy. وَإِذَا مَسَّهُ الْخَيْرُ مَنُوعًا. And when good comes his way, you would assume he would react differently. Now he would be fine. The Quran says no. And when good comes his way, it's not enough for him. If I want to look at myself and say, am I a greedy person? These are 2 signs that the Quran is giving me, yes? When I go through a hard time, am I impatient because I wanted a better life? And when good times come my way, am I manu'a? Do I hold it back from others? Do I try to, yes, keep it to myself? You might have come across people, they have a very heavy scarcity mindset. When money comes up, friendship comes up, whatever it is in life that comes up, you'll see this person holds on to it as if there's not enough of it in the world. As if God can't give more of it to whoever He wishes. This is how this person approaches things. So the Quran said these are the 2 signs of a person who is halur, who has hirs and greed in his heart. Okay, but the problem is nowadays this has been exacerbated. Why? It's become even worse. Because back in the day, when you were greedy and you were haris, yes, you were only living with your own life, dealing with your own life. Now you live in the world of social media. This is a different thing altogether. And I know for many of us, if you're younger, you always assume life has always been like this, yes? And Instagram, whatever, these things have always been there. No, they haven't always been there. Maybe 10, 15 years ago, these things became a thing. For many of us youngsters, this is considered to be, and I'm going to put myself amongst the youngsters right now, yes? We assume that this is how life has always been. No, this is a new test Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has brought into our lives. So social media has done what? Social media, the effect that it has is that it constantly presents me with more options. And before, you used to compare your house with this person, your car with this person. Now people are comparing their relationships. They're comparing their husbands. They're comparing their wives. They're comparing their parents. They're comparing their children with each other. So every morning you wake up, what's the first video? Come with me, I'm gonna unbox this new prize that I got. Come with me, we're gonna go shopping. Come with me, I got this new Rolls Royce that I'm gonna pick up from the dealership. Come with me, I bought my dream house. Come with me, I bought my dream apartment. Now all of a sudden you're sitting in your apartment, in your little home, you're like, wow, people are living lives and my life is nothing compared to all of this. Social media has now exacerbated this to a very heavy degree. And the Quran said something very clear. The Quran said you have to get a hold of this. You have to get a grip on your greed. Otherwise, it can ruin your life. The Quran 2 times said, وَمَنْ يُوقَ شُحَّ نَفْسِهِ. Whoever can control and manage the greed that he finds in his heart, فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. He will be successful in life. 2 times. If you can manage this, a lot of the other vices you will be able to deal with. Okay, so Islam came forward and told us of the problems that you will deal with if you continue to go down this route of fulfilling your greed. What are the problems with greed? Number 1, the first of those problems is this. Islam told you very clearly that if you become greedy and you run after your greed, and you continue chasing the next bigger, better, shinier thing, it will never fulfill you. It doesn't end. It will always continue. This is the problem with greed. The problem with greed is not that if I had some greed right now, then I can get my hands on things, then I'll be fine. The problem is that you never find. The problem is it never ends. Why? Because it has a philosophical reasoning behind it. The reason why greed never ends for you and I is because you always want things that are unlimited. And you live in a world where everything is limited. This is a contradiction. And there's no solution to this contradiction. Everything that you want unlimited of it. You want unlimited house, unlimited car, unlimited wealth, unlimited beauty. But everything you live in this world, everything is limited. This is a problem. That's why the Quran says when the human beings are raised on the day of judgment, they ask them, now this person lived 70 years, 80 years, 90 years, huh? They ask him, they say, listen, how long did you live? قَالَ كَمْ لَبِثْتُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ عَدَدَ السِّنِينَ. You know what the answer they give? He says, you know, in this world, in my barzakh, I think I lived يَوْمًا أَوْ بَعْدَ يَوْم. I either lived one day or maybe half a day. But he might know he lived 90 years. But because the human being always wants everything unlimited, 90 years feels to him like what? A day or half a day, I don't know which one. This one or that one, but that's how much I lived. So Islam came and made this very clear from the very beginning. In Quran and in Hadith. In Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala beautifully tells the Prophet on 2 separate occasions. Say, Ya Rasulullah. And of course the Quran is telling the Prophet, is referring to us. He said, Ya Rasulullah, I want you to know that nothing in this world will fully fulfill you. Nothing. So when you see others in their lives, they have these adornments that we've given them. The Quran calls them, زُخْرُفَ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا. These adornments that we've given them. Ya Rasulullah, la tamuddanna aynayk. Don't sit there and stare at it for too long. Stare at it for too long as in what? Don't sit there and say, I wish I had this. Why? Zahrat al-hayat ad-dunya, it's not going to fulfill you anyways. It's just the beauty of this world. I adorn this world a little bit, make it look beautiful a little bit, but at the end of the day, it's not going to take you anywhere. And even more beautiful, the first Imam, Ali ibn Abi Talib, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, he said, "At-tama'u riqqun mukhallat." He said, greed is continuous captivity. You're never free from it. Yani it will rob you of happiness like none other. The 6th Imam came forward and used 2 beautiful analogies. He said, you know what this greed is like? Greed is when this silkworm, you've seen silkworms, yes? Silkworm, the more he tries to gather things around himself, the more he buries himself in. The more he wraps this silk around him, he's assuming that he's adding to his possessions. The more he's buried under all of that. And then in another narration, he said, the pleasures of this world, if someone has greed towards them, you know what they feel like? They are like seawater, like salty water. The more you drink from it, the thirstier you will get. The Quran made this very clear from the very beginning. And I'll tell you, brothers and sisters, this principle that I mentioned as a simple principle is something that other human beings who don't have faith and Islam in their life will have to spend 100 years to figure out. You and I, we just assume that these are basic things. Yes, greed is a bad thing. No, there's many people in the world today who don't know this. There are many people in the world today, as we speak, he really thinks if he can only get his hand on this thing, then he will be fulfilled. This is a gem that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala came and placed right in front of you in our lap. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught you this principle from a very young age. He said, listen, you're Muslim, let me tell you from right now, that greed that you have, nothing in this world is going to fulfill it. This is a gem Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave to you and I. He has saved you so much pain, so much confusion, so much unnecessary effort in this world just by you knowing that nothing in this world will fulfill you. It's a blessing. We don't appreciate Islam the way we need to appreciate Islam. As a 20-year-old or a 15-year-old, you knowing in your life, for the next 80 years of your life, you know what? I can benefit from the pleasures of this world to a certain extent. But me knowing nothing is going to fulfill me. Oh, that is one of the biggest gifts that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted to you and I. We don't appreciate it. So other people, they have to spend years to figure this out. Now this one, he has to come and read 100 books. This one, he has to listen to 100 podcasts. This one, he has to go and take 100 happiness seminars to figure out this basic rule. And Islam came forward and told you very simply, put this gem in your lap. He said, "At-tama'u riqun mukhallad." This is a captivity that will never end. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saved us from so much headache. I personally, I read a lot of nonfiction. Maybe a lot of stuff that doesn't necessarily have to do with Islamic studies. A lot of different areas is part of my passion. But one of those areas where I keep a little bit of distance from, are areas where this author wants to come forward and now teach me how to live life. He wants to come and teach me the foundational values in life. I don't need you. I have Quran and Hadith for that. Sure, maybe I want to manage this. Maybe I want to figure out how to run a business. Yeah, you read these books. There's no doubt about them. There's no problem with them. Yes? Very beneficial, in fact. But if an author wants to come with his limited knowledge, he doesn't even know how to figure out his own life. Now he wants to come in his book and his podcast. He wants to come and tell me the foundational values of life. I don't need you. You're barely figuring out your own life. I don't need Jordan Peterson to come and tell me there's 12 rules of life. And then come later to tell me there's 12 more rules for life. And you read the book and you have no idea what he's talking about. No, the Quran came and told you the rules of life very simply. Yes, reading nonfiction is very beneficial. But I don't want to have it replace Quran and Hadith. Jordan Peterson can't even figure out his own life. He can't even figure out who's the oppressor and who is being oppressed. He'll sit there and say, I give him hell. This is who this person is. Not because he's bad, because this is a human being. Human being. His emotions get the best of him. His ego gets the best of him. So on and so forth. Either he doesn't know or he knows and he does it knowingly. Then he's in fact an evil individual. Whatever the case might be. Either way, I don't need to sit there and listen to 100 podcasts for them to tell me what to do, what not to do. It's a shame. Sometimes I sit in a car of someone else. We're going somewhere, getting a ride to go somewhere else. Yes. And this person says, Sheikh, when I'm in the car, I listen to this radio show. I listen to this podcast. I listen to this. Okay, yeah, it's not a problem. Then he says, I listen to this so I can learn how to live life. You don't need this podcast to learn how to live life. You need Quran and Hadith. You need to read a little bit more of that. The foundational values in our life we take from Islam. Islam came forward, told you very clearly, this captivity will never end. This greed that you have, just know it's not going to fulfill you. Yes? So you say, okay, so what am I supposed to do? This is a contradiction. I have greed in my heart. I want more. You're telling me that this was never going to be fulfilled. Islam came forward and said, listen, the greed that you have in your heart, there's a temporary fix for it, and then there's an ultimate fix for it. The temporary fix for it is called qana'ah, contentment. Be happy with what you have. Huh? That's why the first Imam, Ali ibn Abi Talib, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. He said what? He said, La kanza kal qana'ah. The first Imam said, there's no treasure like contentment. Why? Because if I'm content, I will be fully fulfilled in life? No, but it will give you enough where life will become manageable for you, yes? But then if you're looking for that ultimate fulfillment, it's not going to come here. It's going to come where? It's going to come in a different place. God calls it heaven. It's a very different situation. And if you want to see that ultimate fulfillment, the greatest blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants to you and I on the day of judgment and in heaven, out of all of the blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about when it comes to heaven, the fruits and the companionship and this and that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said there's one blessing, nothing else matches this one. وَرِضْوَانٌ مِّنَ اللَّهِ أَكْبَرٌ. When you realize that God is pleased with you, there's no feeling like that in the world. You and I, we hear this, we say, yeah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with me. I mean, I don't think that's too special. I thought, they were going to give me a bigger mansion. They were going to give me a bigger car over there. You say, no, this feeling is worth more than all of this. You want to see an analogy so you can understand this better, yes? Use an analogy of celebrities. This celebrity, he's acting in a movie or whatever, he's going to win an award, yes? As part of his life, he's probably wealthy. He's very well known. Probably Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed him with his appearance, so on and so forth, yes? When he comes up to get this reward on the stage, everyone is screaming his name. And people will die for his signature. But none of these are as special for him as that moment when he gets this reward and he remembers his mother. He remembers his father. He remembers someone who was very close to him, and that person is proud of him now. Nothing comes close to this. You know why you can tell this? Because usually this is the moment when they begin to cry. This is the moment where the emotions start to present themselves. Nothing is as special as me knowing the one who cared for me her whole life is happy with me. Now take your mother, take your father, replace that with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala looks at you, He says, in my words, you made it. I'm happy with you. I'm pleased with you. The Quran said when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls back the soul, what does He say? Irji'i ila rabbiki radiyatan mardiyah. Come back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in two states. Number one, radiyah, you'll be happy. But you know what's even more special? You will be mardi. Allah will be happy with you. Nothing can replace that feeling. The full fulfillment comes there. And this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala placed greed as part of our existence. There is no human being that's been created that doesn't have greed. There's no human being that's been created that is pleased with anything that is limited. Every human being always wants more. This is not a bad thing. This is that thing that pushes me to pursue God. If I didn't have this sense in me, then I would be satisfied with this world. I wouldn't go looking for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The one thing that pushes you and I to go beyond the pleasures of this world and look for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His existence is what? Is me wanting more. If I didn't want more, then a little bit of food here, a little bit of money here, a little big house here, I would have been happy. It would have been the end of the discussion. Allama Tabatabai says beautifully in his tafsir. He says greed is the one thing that pushes you towards God. The only problem is instead of pointing it in the right direction, I point it in the wrong direction. This is the problem that you and I have. So number one, Islam said, you will never be able to fulfill this greed that you have. That's problem number one. Problem number two is that greed doesn't really work. What do we mean? So I'm going to be greedy in life, huh? I'm going to sacrifice other things to get my hands on this. The problem is it doesn't work. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, you getting your hands on that thing doesn't matter if you're greedy or not. You can work hard, but then when it reaches greed, it doesn't matter. Your greed has zero impact on the world, because either I've written for you to actually get it, well then when you worked hard, you'll get it. Or I've written for you not to get it, well then your greed is not going to help you. Umar ibn Sa'd al-Mal'un, what did he do? He sold his whole life for the governorship of Ray. Did he get it? No, not even one day did he eat from the food of Ray. In fact, the narrations told us that, listen, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has written for you, it's impossible for you to avoid it. You can't. You can't. So the Prophet Muhammad al-Mustafa salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, he said, Jibreel told me that no soul will ever leave this world until he has done istifa. He has fully received his rizq. He can't. Even if he wanted to, he can't. Even if you wanted to avoid the blessings that God has written down for you, you can't. Now you're sitting here acting like it's in your hands, you're being greedy about it, selling your akhirah for it. For what? Problem number 2 with greed, it doesn't work. Yes? It's like a product, they marketed this product to us, huh? But now I'm telling you the review. The review from the Shaykh is probably the best review, yes? The review from the Shaykh is 1 star, because they don't allow 0 stars, huh? 1 star doesn't work. You read these reviews, huh? So this product doesn't work. Don't spend your money here. Go spend your money elsewhere. Greed doesn't work. Islam said, if it's written for you, you'll get it. If it's not written for you, even if you work hard and then you get greedy about it, you're not going to get it. So you and I have to begin working to combat this greed that I have. Recite a salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ajjal farajah. I want to work on the greed that I have in my heart. What am I supposed to do? Surah Al-Ma'arij, the verses that we began the lecture with, very clearly lays out our game plan. The Quran said, إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ خُلِقَ هَلُوعًا إِذَا مَسَّهُ الشَّرُّ جَزُوعًا وَإِذَا مَسَّهُ الْخَيْرُ مَنُوعًا. Everyone is like this, except there's one group of people, they're able to manage the greed that they have. إِلَّا الْمُصَلِّينَ. Except for the ones who pray. Solution number 1 is I have to strengthen my relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That relationship has to be a strong one. A flimsy relationship is not going to cut it. You know why? Because the Quran said, not just anyone who prays will be able to manage his greed. He said, الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَلَى صَلَاتِهِمْ دَائِمُونَ. If you're consistent with it, if this is a thing you do day in and day out, that relationship becomes a strong relationship. You will be able to say no to your greed. It will make it more likely at the very least. Solution number 1, the Quran said, strengthen your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then the verses continue. Solution number 2, the Quran said, وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي أَمْوَالِهِمْ حَقٌّ مَعْلُومٌ لِلسَّائِلِ وَالْمَحْرُومِ. These people who can manage their greed, you know what they do? They actively and practically try to work against their greed. So as much as their soul is telling them, hold on to stuff, what does he do? He gives. In their wealth, they always have a budget line for charity. They always have something set aside, لِلسَّائِل, for someone who comes and asks, and also for the one who doesn't come and ask, but they know he's in need. Sa'il, mahroom. Sa'il is the one who comes and asks. Mahroom is the one who's deprived. Maybe he doesn't come and ask. Maybe he's embarrassed. Maybe he's not even where you live. But he's in need. So number 2, I have to give a little bit. This is the indication of the believer that the Quran mentioned. Said the believer always gives. Always. When things are going well, he gives more. When things are not going well, he gives a little bit. But in good times and in bad times, he gives. Solution number 2. Then the Quran continued. Solution number 3. The Quran said, وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ مِنْ عَذَابِ رَبِّهِمْ مُشْفِقُونَ. The reason why he can manage his greed is because he's looking towards the akhirah. He has bigger concerns in life. has bigger worries in life. The more I look towards the akhirah, the easier it is for me to deal with this world. The more I put my head down and I'm just dealing with this world and I'm not looking at the horizon, the more I get bogged down. This person, the reason why he can deal with his greed and manage it is because he's looking elsewhere. He has a bigger goal in life, bigger purpose in life. This person, he's worried about his akhirah. Why? Because he says, "Inna adhaba rabbihim ghayru ma'mun." He's not so sure that he's not going to deal with the punishment of hellfire. Which means what? He's working for his akhirah. He's busy working on something else. He can't get so bogged down with everything here. He doesn't have so much time to run after things here. His mindset is he's busy with something elsewhere. So the Quran is telling you, if you want to deal with your greed, you have to elevate who you are. You have to become a more worthy person. Why? Because greed, at the very root of it, if you go down to what it really actually stems from, it actually stems from a sense of inferiority. It stems from an idea of me feeling worthless, which is why I'm willing to sell my life to a pleasure in this world. If I sit there and say, you know what, yeah, I'm willing to chase this for the rest of my life, what does that mean? That's the worth of me. I'm worth $1,000. I'm worth $50,000. I'm worth a big house. I'm worth a really nice car. I'm worth a position. Sometimes people are worth what? Some person coming and just telling them something that makes them happy a little bit. Like, I'm worth one comment from one person. That's possible. Huh? Our president, yeah, he's worth what? People just coming and telling him he's amazing. Just how it works. Everybody who has greed, he has a sense of humiliation deep inside. Why? Because he's, in other words, telling everybody, this is my worth. This is what I'm worth. So, Amirul Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, he said beautifully, he said that the human being, if he wants to be able to stay away from greed, he has to understand that heaven is his reward. Nothing in this world is his reward. The final solution to me dealing with my greed is what? Is that I have to disassociate and keep some distance from individuals who have greed and are greedy. They look at life from that angle. First of all, I cannot consult them, the narrations say. And what was the biggest mistake that Adam made? Shaitan became the one giving him consultation. Shaitan, the reason why he got Adam to make the mistake that he made is that he came and told him, he said, listen, let me just share some counsel with you. If you go and eat from this fruit, you will live forever. You'll be everlasting. أَن تَكُونَ مِنَ الْخَالِدِينَ. You will be able to live forever. This was the mistake that Adam made. Adam wanted more. And he associated with who? With Shaitan. Shaitan gave him the consultation that he wanted to give him. Yes? This is number one. Number two, I have to keep my distance from such a person. Maybe I don't have that friendship. I have to put a pause on it. Maybe I have to keep some distance from this individual. A person who is greedy, I have to keep some distance. And this is why in our narration, in our tradition, even a scholar who's at a very high status, a marja', the expectation is that he set aside his greed. The expectation is that he lives a modest life. We've seen those scenes when the Pope was coming to meet Ayatollah Sistani in the alleys of Najaf. Did you ever see the difference? Was the difference very striking to you and I? It was very striking because here came this Pope with his entourage and with his clothing and from his palace and all of this. And he's looking in the alleys of Najaf to try to find where's Ayatollah Sistani's house. That simplicity in the life of a marja is very crucial. It's very important. And this is also what you find the difference between our maraja, and I say this with respect, and the Agha Khans that you find. And the Agha Khan is a title, is a recent title, maybe for the last 3 or 4 imams of the Nizari, Ismaili school of thought, who we respect, of course. But this is a difference that you see. The Agha Khan, what type of life does he live? The marja, what type of life does he live? It's a different life. And in fact, much of it might be halal money. That's not a problem. That's not what we're saying, God forbid, yes? But the lifestyles are different. Someone who wants to walk in the footsteps of Ahlul Bayt. Someone who says, I represent this family. You and I instinctively know he cannot live a luxurious life. He cannot live above average. No. That's why when Ayatollah Sistani writes a sentence and says everyone has to come together to give their life to save this country, people come in the thousands. That's the difference. There's a major difference. And this is what we see in the life of our beloved second Imam, Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. Ibn Asakir, the famous Sunni historian, he says in his book Tarikh Medina, Dimashq, he says, Hassan ibn Ali, Hassan, the son of Ali, 2 times in his life, he fully split his life with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for charity. All the way down to the pair of shoes and sandals that he owned. And this pair for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this pair for me. Why can the second Imam give charity like this? It's because of a mindset that he had. So they asked him, and I'll end with this line inshallah. They asked him, Ya ibn Rasulullah, can you describe stinginess for us? Can you describe bukhl for us? He said, yes, I can describe stinginess for you. Stinginess is when a human being sees the money that he gives in the path of Allah as something that's lost and gone, and the wealth that he keeps to himself as something that's remaining for him. If he has this mindset, he will automatically become stingy. He has to get rid of this mindset to be able to manage the greed that he has in his heart. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on this auspicious occasion, by the right of our beloved second Imam, that he gives us the opportunity to be amongst those who can manage their greed, inshaAllah.